follow. The interesting thing, if you go into AI, your competitive advantage is not AI because everybody has access to the same models. Yeah, but just talk about AI. They have infinitely more money and talent and people than OpenAI had, and they come up with nothing. I think that one of the biggest mistakes, I hired full-time employees too early when I started because I didn't know better, and I should have definitely outsourced more. Like, you can come from a rich country with a really good education system, but it almost cancels out because there's no better learning source than the internet.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Devico Breakfast Bar. Here we speak with different people involved in the business landscape, share their expertise, delve into the latest tech trends, and explore the ins and outs of IT outsourcing. I'm Oleg Sadikov, and today I'm excited to have Hans-Kristian Bjerregaard, founder of Clerk and WorkJoy. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new episodes. Hi Hans-Kristian, thanks for joining me today.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me here.
Could you start by telling us a bit about yourself and your professional background?
Yeah, so as Christian, I'm now what you would call a serial entrepreneur because I've started multiple companies. My background is actually that originally I thought I was going to be like an organic chemist. So the whole path of entrepreneurship and programming and stuff like that was not anything I thought of as a child, but like during life, I just discovered programming and found that to be very fun. And by accident, I also found out that entrepreneurship was really, really fun. Clerk was basically started by an accident by me building a product that people wanted to buy for fun. Clerk is 10 years old now, does e-commerce personalization all across Europe to one of the biggest players in Europe. So every time you want to connect consumers and products, that's what we help with across like website, email, marketing, stuff like that. Really help e-commerce players give them a leg up on the big players such as Amazon or Temu or whatever, so they get a better business that's more profitable. And then, my latest company is actually when I scaled Clerk, I discovered what I would call the power of leadership, how instrumental it is for not only company performing, but also just well-being of all the humans, both employees and customers. So really I felt that a lot of the things I learned was great leadership, was not really supported in a lot of the tools I used to lead, like Slack and Notion and that whole thing. So build WorkJoy up around, and there's a consistent pattern around what some of the best companies do today. That's different from what other companies do. So there's a system that from the ground up is built to support those patterns of working. So that's WorkJoy. And I actually, since we talked last time, I've actually spun off a little AI side project of WorkJoy. So I'm a big believer in focus, but sometimes you find a gold nugget, then you have to pick it up. So I also just launched UpdateMate.ai that just helps companies streamline internal communication with AI agents. So lots of things going on.
Everyone goes to AI right now.
I think it's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, every guest I'm having here, everyone does something in terms of AI.
But the funny thing is, and actually, because that's been reported over, the interesting thing, if you go into AI, your competitive advantage is not AI. Because everybody has access to the same models. Whether that being some of OpenAI's models or the Llama models or whatever you might have it. So the interesting thing in that space is that it just gives you new opportunities because you can use computers differently, but the apps are going to be more or less the same as before. I see LLMs going the same way as databases. You're going to have a lot of them open source and free, and you just self-host. And then you can buy a few enterprise grade, like you can buy an Oracle database. But most people are going to use that Excel or MySQL or something like that. So there's a lot of people in AI, but I just love having entered the AI space and realize that the competitive edge is not AI. The competitive edge is still all the old things, but AI just allows you to solve a new set of problems.
It creates problems to solve problems.
It also creates some problems, but that's all tech. The internet did the same thing.
What inspired you to start Clerk.io and WorkJoy? What's the story behind that?
I had no idea I was going to be an entrepreneur. Just as I had no idea growing up I was going to be a programmer. Like this whole world that I live in, anything I was introduced to or exposed to in any way. I think I was even pretty late to the internet, mid-2000s, something like that, before we even got internet access. So Clerk really started out by me getting a job in an e-commerce store called Unisport. Unisport was quite small. Today it's the largest e-soccer retailer in Europe, but it was pretty small back then. It was the first internal IT guy. I could barely write a line of code. I was actually hired to just work in the warehouse, like putting products online, but then you had to do a bit of HTML to format the text. So that was kind of like, so by accident, Unisport actually both by accident got me into real programming. But then later, after I've been there for 5 years, I discovered we just had so many problems with upselling customers in terms of that it took so long for the traditional AI systems to pick up and learn new trends. So we just lost a lot of sales from AI not learning fast enough. So I built the first thing I really made was a different kind of AI there that could solve the cold start problem in e-commerce, basically meaning when a new customer comes in, we already know just by the page they enter on, we already know a lot about what they're going to buy, what they're interested in, what they're going to look for. And the same when you come with a new product, just by looking at the product and learning, like, what's the difference between a sock and a shoe? We could really quickly come up with good predictions for our recommendation engine, search engine, and stuff like that. Clerk was actually started just as me fiddling around with a problem that could help my old employer in Unisport. And then they wanted to buy it because we tested it out and it worked really well. So they wanted to buy it. And if they hadn't asked like the question of like, what's the price? Like, I think they've just given it to them for free. Clerk was actually started because I had to send them an invoice. So it kind of started backwards. So it started day one with MRR. So that was my motivation for starting. Clerk was really just solving a problem I had experienced in my old work. And the work is basically the same thing. Because then when I scaled Clerk as a company, I saw that the leadership principles that work really well and gave us a competitive edge. Like in Clerk, we outperformed most of our funded competitors without raising any funding, just being self-funded all the way. And a lot of that came from a different way of working. And that way of working needed a different set of tools that we don't really have today. So that's Workjoy. It's a collaboration platform, especially for, you would today say it's especially for remote companies, but I just believe it's for companies that live in the present day and not back in the 50s, 80s, and 90s, which most of our work routines come from, when everybody have to travel to a factory and office to do work. Yeah, that's how it came across those. And again, Update Made is a spin-off again of Workjoy. Some of the things we experimented with in Workjoy that we're going to build in as a native feature in Workjoy, we found out could actually be a standalone product. Now we're trying to spin that off as well.
Let's talk about the value of small creative teams in driving quality and innovation in tech projects. As per your experience, how to maintain creativity within such teams, especially as there is need to grow?
I think this is a super interesting thing because size is good for throughput, but bad for quality. Like we know that from almost everywhere, that the small teams always outperform the bigger teams because they can build better quality and they can usually build it faster and better. I think that's super interesting, like why that is. And if you really want to go down that rabbit hole, like it's fundamentally built into our biology. If you really want the hardcore facts, it's like we're not good at being in big social groups. We're not good at connecting with a lot of people. I was just at a science talk a month ago. I thought it was really funny. It was more of a like, it was really dark theme, but it was put in a really humoristic light. But the point was more or less like the whole talk was about why religion actually came out of why we evolved to be religious in terms of natural selection. And what you can see is that if you look at primate groups like humans or monkeys and stuff like that, you can plot a group size, like either 10 individuals in a group or 20 or 50 or 100. On the other axis, you can plot how big a percentage of the group dies by homicide. Like how many die from natural causes and how many are killed by their group members. An interesting thing, you have no homicides below 20, but then around 20, abruptly homicide starts to become like 10-20% of people dying. And you cannot have a group of more than 80 people without the homicide rate goes to 100%. Like we get so frustrated being in a social setting that we basically kill each other. Now, why is that interesting? It's interesting because you see that all across when humans try to work together. The point of the talk was you could see that the upper cap of like 50 people. If you had religion, you could see you could actually, if you had religion with many gods, you could lift that cap to 150. And if you had a single god, you could lift that cap of a group to 300. So it essentially allows us to live together in bigger cities, religion. Now, which is also why you see if many companies need to grow fast, they will get this cult-like traits, get internal names, like uses a little bit of a touch of religious tools, and that's what you need to really bring a large group of people together quickly. No, so I just thought that was really fascinating because it tells us a lot about that we humans are not good in big groups. Like, because we don't know each other well enough, and if you're a social animal and the group is important to survive, then you want to know you trust people. So like, we have this band of 10 to 20 people we can trust. It's from that biology you get all of like Jeff Bezos' two-pizza rule or stuff like that. Like now we're on a long rant about biology, but I just want to say this point about small teams and creativity and all the problems we see when they scale to big teams, it's actually rooted deeply within our biology. So if you just take that fact and say, okay, we know that, we can observe it, we know it's rooted in biology, we can observe it across any kind of big organization that has ever been built, no matter that being a company or an army or any kind of big political organization and stuff like that. Like small groups is where the creativity is made. And I think it's basically because trust is higher in small groups. That was a long range. I just find it really fascinating that this is just something we pull out of our asses, but it's actually rooted in biology. Based on that, it's just an observation. I think it's not even a belief I had. It's just an observation that our creative work is created by small groups. And we always see innovation coming from the small companies, not the big companies. So from that, I really tried to take advantage of that. And within my own companies, build really, really small teams. Like I rarely want a team to be bigger than 10 people. And most teams can be smaller than 10 people. I think Clerk was built by a team of 4 people at Mix. Like for half the company's lifetime, I was the only programmer. For the second half, like when we were 150 people, we were still just 4 developers. And it just gave fewer paths of communication, more freedom for the individual to do creative work, and less room to hide in. If you are owning your own thing alone, then it's really transparent if you're doing a good or bad job.
How about Apple, Google creating dozens of patents every single year? I think they have a lot of resources to invest in innovation. Or it's still created by a small group of people, by departments, just with the resources.
Yeah, but just talk about AI. They have infinitely more money and talent and people than OpenAI had. And they come up with nothing. You see it all the time. Sometimes there needs a lot of money to build something. Like a lot of the foundation of the internet was built by the US military. A lot of the core technology before the internet, like the hardware and software, like internet part, not the World Wide Web built on top of it. So sometimes you need these big research things that can only be built with big budgets over a long time. But that's usually used to like physical constraints. But the beautiful thing about the whole computing space is that it's just ideas. When you program, you're just moving your idea from your brain down into the machine so it can execute it over and over. And ideas doesn't really get better with many brains. It does to an extent, but there's also an upper limit. And even the companies that are really innovative, they have usually been really, really centralized. Like Apple is famous for being clearly doing well under Steve Jobs, not doing well under another CEO, and then doing well again under Steve Jobs. Like one man. You see the same with Tesla and Elon Musk, even though I'm not a big personal Elon Musk fan. So I think there's just a lot of power in individuals just doing that through. And usually when you build really big product teams, what usually happens is that the creativity goes out the door. Like we humans have, unfortunately, this off switch that if we are not allowed to express our creativity the way we want, just turn it off. Like check into work, check out again, not doing anything. And I try to just leverage. Small teams create a lot of transparency and a high degree of ownership. I think that's the mechanic that works in small teams.
How do you envision the future of remote work evolving, especially with the emergence of hybrid work models?
I actually hate the term remote work because I think it should actually be the other way around. Remote work should just be called work, or hybrid work should just be called work. And then strictly bound to an office work should be called that. What would you call it? Centralized work? Something like that. Just as we do with, look at our customers. We try to get customers from all over the world. Why would we limit ourselves to limited geography? We talk to each other from different parts of the world. We try to get customers from different parts of the world. And then we have this idea that we want to limit our employees to only be from a certain part of the world. I just don't think that makes much sense. So I'm all in on what you would call remote work, basically because of three things. I think you have an exponentially higher access to smart people. So that gives you simply just, it's more likely for you to hire a smart person when you're remote. The interesting thing about remote people, I find, is that they actually, at least for the culture I like, which is like energetic and optimistic, like people that go outside the default norms and search a job like in another country remote, do something different and not just like the default, what everybody else is doing, I think are more interesting to be around. So I think remote culture is actually, a lot of people talk about this great office culture. I'm just like, I just find that people I hire remotely to be much more vibrant. I try to find the same people locally, but it's just harder. So again, I think cultures, I think it's stronger remote. When you have more choice, you also get better people. Yeah, and then I think that what I call remote leadership, it's just good leadership. Like you just don't have the office to hotfix things, but when you talk to people, and I figure out what we do that work really well remotely, and what people say is hard about remote, it's just good leadership. It's just clear delegation. So you don't have to hatch things in a meeting or something like that. It's just about planning well ahead. Like everybody making sure, like communicating clearly. They are more important when you're not in an office at the same place. But just to run some numbers out, I cannot understand people that like keep this idea of staying local. Because if you just look at it today, we have 1.2 billion people on the planet in their 20s. Around 2/3 of them have grown up with access to the internet their whole life. That's about 800 million. And depending on studies, like 10 to 30% of the population is what you will call high agency. Like that's the ones you really want in a company. Those are the ones that makes the difference. So let's just say you have 100 million people as a talent pool for a remote job. Like if I try to hire locally in Copenhagen within a like 30-minute commute radius from any office, I'm restricted maybe down to a pool of tens of thousands that I then have to compete with all the other companies that in the Copenhagen area about. Or I can go out, so I can fish in this little pond that's just literally the shore is just filled with people fishing. Or I could go out to the wide ocean where almost nobody is because it's hard to sail in a boat on the ocean. Like for me, it's so obvious if you really are serious about attracting the best people, go remote. And I think many people are just remote because they don't know the tools. But I think it's just as a leader, it's just about leveling up your toolbox because the things that work well remote are also the things that would make your team in the office happier. But I don't believe in like we have to go remote and not being in an office. I actually just believe that you should be free to choose what you want. So if you love being in an office and really think that's fine, like I actually think that's just as much part of the remote work as like the fully remote thing is. So I just believe you should be free to like pick and choose, and different companies should be able to pick and choose, and different employees should be able to pick and choose, but they want you to design the life that you love. But I think a lot of people are just stuck in the default because that's what that dad did before them and their granddad did before them, all the back to when we were farmers. Like showing up at a certain point when your boss told you to, going home again when he told you could go home.
You have adopted a hybrid approach to outsourcing. Could you share some insights into how you determine what is suitable for outsourcing?
I just think that the beautiful thing about being good at remote is actually you automatically get good at outsourcing. And a lot of problems in a company are temporary, which means they're really, really ripe for outsourcing instead of hiring a person to fix that. And then when they have fixed it, it's kind of, okay, what should I do then? I see a lot of companies do that. And then people create all of this soda work to kind of keep active or keep valuable out of the good of their heart. I think that one of the biggest mistakes, I hired full-time employees too early when I started because I didn't know better. And I should have definitely outsourced more. And as the company grew, clearly, we outsourced more. We outsourced anything that was not a core capability or temporal was really the things that are good at outsourcing. And the same for workshop, where I think I even going to outsource even more. And if you have these remote and hybrid processes, it's super easy for a lot of outsourced and a lot of your work to be outsourced because it fits really, really well into those processes. Because if you have processes where everybody have to meet in a meeting room in an office, that's really hard to outsource. because the people you outsource to have to travel to your office and be there. But if you have a remote, what we call remote or hybrid way of working, then it's just super easy to plug people in. It doesn't matter if they are contracts or one-time thing doing a thing, or if they are employees been there for 5 or 10 years. But I think it's really important that, is it a long-term thing? It's much better to have them in-house. Is it a short-term thing? You want to test things out? It's much better to outsource. And also, especially for new startups, I would actually say for new leaders, I actually recommend them to outsource more, because it's actually easier than leading your own team. Because when you outsource, either there's somebody on the other end managing the people, or you're outsourcing to freelancers, which have to be able to self-manage in order for a business to work. So actually, you're delegating to people that are more professional at being delegated to than a regular employee would.
What are the main advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing?
I think in the old way of working, it was really different from the office way of working.
You mean while outsourcing?
Yeah. Because if all your processes are built, all your communication processes, all your planning processes are built for you meeting in a meeting room in an office, if you have built that culture where that's your toolbox, that's why you ask all these people to spend all the time to travel to your office. It's because you have set of tools, your internal company cadence and dynamics that relies on you being together in an office. So when you have parts that are not, you're not used to communicating, for example, well in writing. You're not planning ahead and delegating. There's a lot of things that just is not part of your everyday muscle. You're just not in shape to do that kind of work. So I think outsourcing, especially under the old model, is just, it's harder because it feels different. But it's just because it's part of leading you're not really shaping. Whereas if you are a remote company, outsourcing, as I say, it's almost trivially easy. So if you talk about the advantages and disadvantages, I think the biggest disadvantage is that if you're running your company by the old model, it feels so different. It's really clear who you're outsourcing to or who you're not. You get much more disadvantage doing that as a traditional company, whereas a remote company, you can almost not feel the difference. So you get all the advantages almost without any of the disadvantages.
Are there specific regions or countries that you find particularly promising for tech talent? And how do you navigate the challenges associated with a global talent pool?
But I think that's the beauty of it. That's why I'm looking so much into young people with high agency and have access to the internet. Because if you are in that group, it doesn't matter where you're from. High agency people cannot stop learning and getting smarter and exploring and trying things. So it doesn't matter where you come from. As long as you have high agency of access to the internet, you can come from a rich country with a really good education system, but it almost cancels out because there's no better learning source than the internet, than YouTube videos, than Wikipedia. They're consistently better than any university material or stuff you can go through. So it's not everything you can learn on the internet. It's hard to do lab work. I studied chemistry. That part is hard on the internet. But for everything that's just learning, everybody has access to the best learning resources we have ever had as humans. So the advantage of coming from an economy with a good economic system is just getting really, really tiny. Biggest advantage you have today is actually just habits. I believe a lot of people in the Western world, they're really lucky that a lot of leaders are older and insist on doing things the old way, at least for the next 10 or 20 years. But yeah, why is a program in Copenhagen more expensive than one outside of Copenhagen? It's not because they're better. It's just because you're paying for the premium of them being able to travel to your office at a reasonable time. Why are programmers in the US so much more expensive than the rest of the world? Just because there's more VC money to push up the prices, and people are not used to work with people remotely. It's not quality you're paying for. You're just paying for the premium of the old habits.
As we wrap up our conversation, what advice would you give to business leaders considering outsourcing as part of their growth strategy?
The advice I would basically give, as you can also hear, is there's always things that make sense to outsource, but I think it's more about waking up and looking at the team you put together and how you hire talent differently. Because if you go a more remote or hybrid way, then it becomes more easy to outsource different pools of the work. So a lot of the work that's actually temporal can be outsourced to people that are experts within that specific area. So I think my advice is mostly just like, if you're just stuck with a pool of people that live around you, like I think you're just leaving all the best talent on the floor. Not because you don't have good talent living near you, but just because of the probability that the best people live near you is just super, super low. My best advice is basically that if you think more fundamentally instead of like outsourcing with insourcing, which I think is maybe something you would do 10, 20 years ago, it should be much more about how can I make sure that I always have the smartest people for everything? And how can it work in a way where sometimes those are outsourced or even temporary contractors? And sometimes those are like full-time insourced staff. Like, I think there's a lot of in the way you work remote where you just get that for free.
Very interesting conversation, Hans-Kristian. Thanks for your answers. I agree with some of your points, and I'm sure my audience will find this information.
What do you disagree with? That's the most interesting part.
The part about remote work, because before COVID, companies still outsourced a lot.
Yeah.
And the outsourcing teams didn't have to go to the office. They still worked in balance with the in-house clients team that was in the office. And that part, which I disagree with, but it also depends on the processes, just internal processes.
Yeah, but you can still clearly feel it because it's like having two offices. And that's just what's holding many people back from outsourcing, is that now you have a group that's not there physically as everybody else is, which means you need to do more planning ahead. There's the tools you can use when you can just jump into a meeting room and just do things. And so I think, yeah, it works well. It's not because it doesn't work well, but it just works as if you had multiple offices. And I think that's the barrier that holds people that are not outsourcing today away from outsourcing, is that if you have this only in-office environment, then it feels so different having somebody else elsewhere. That's why I see so many leaders protesting that employees work from home, because they don't have the tools to manage that. So if they don't have the tools for their own teams to be at home, like they don't have the tools for agency sitting elsewhere, and I can know from like firsthand experience that when people are frustrated with the way outsourcing is done or how outsourcing is working, it's basically just because they don't really have the tools to manage that outsourced teams, because the toolbox is so much built for everything they manage being within the same office at the same hours.
Makes sense. Hans-Kristian, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining me today. It was a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoy our discussion and want to stay updated on future episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you will not miss out on the latest insights and conversations from the Devico Breakfast Bar. See you in a week.